my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to speak on a smart city in Lucknow. And it's for the second time that I am using this platform to speak on the smart city. My first presentation was about 2 years ago when the UP government invited me to speak to the municipal commissioners to demystify some of the concept of a smart city in India. But today's presentation is going to be a little different, and I'm going to talk about that what is the approach with the Australia is adopting in developing the concept of the smart city, as well as implementing some of the pillars of the smart city in Australia. In briefly, I'm just going to touch base on the Queensland Australia Smart City Consortium, who we are and what we are trying to do, what the strengths are. Then I will talk about the Australian Smart City Plan in order to bring some of the similarities and the dissimilarities between the approach that India is following and which is Australia is following. Then I will talk very briefly about the city deals, which is basically an instrument of implementing the smart city plan in Australian cities. And then more importantly, I'll talk about which is very unique to Australia, even and to my mind probably for the world for the first time, that a performance framework has been developed to monitor the progress of the smart cities, both in the big cities as well as in the smart cities. And then I will talk about very briefly about some of the innovative approaches of the Ipswich City Council in turning the Ipswich City into a smart city by focusing and concentrating only on those initiatives which are citizen-centric. In terms of the Smart City Consortium, the Queensland University of Technology, which I represent, is the lead. We have other partners like Robert Bird Group, which is basically a large engineering and planning company. We have WT Partnerships, which deal largely with the water management and planning. We have the Koch Architecture. We have UAP company, which is basically a architectural company which deals with heritage and old city planning, and Ipswich City Council. And let me talk a little bit about that what is the role with the QUT of the Queensland University and the type of the expertise and experience it has in the smart city domain. And to me, the most important things comes to my mind is what we know as the CARSQ, which is this Center for Accidental Research. In the CARSQ, the road safety is a very significant aspect of the entire work, not only in terms of designing the roads from the safety perspective, but also in terms of the capacity building. One of the newest research of the CARSQ has been on the relationship between the population aging and how the roads and the transport network has to respond to the old people. And you will, and some of the findings has been that as the population is growing, the entire requirement of the transport sector is also changing, and unless we take cognizance of those kind of requirements, we are far away from the road safety. The second big aspect that the QUT is doing is devising the technologies for the decentralized solid waste management. And the third important thing which comes to my mind is straight away in relation to the smart city, that we are trying to develop the models using the big data for 3 or 4 different typologies, and what we call it the precincts in a box. We'll be trying to develop some kind of a model for the different context for the smart city, where as you can feed the different contextual data, that will give you a model of the different architecture of the smart city. Now, as we have in India the smart city, the Australia has also developed what is known as the smart city plan, which is being implemented through the instrument of city deals, which I will talk about it. But one important thing about the Australian city plan is that the key agency which is implementing the smart city plan is the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. This is a very conscious decision in order to bring the coordination and collaboration between the different departments. It also creates some kind of authority in implementing the sectoral approaches to the city plan. And by doing that, I think the Australian government has been very successful in bringing the different state governments, city council, business, and community together in order to achieve the objectives of the smart city. The smart city plan basically envisages that as we continue to grow, the requirement of the economy will also change, the job perspective also change, and ultimately what we need to do is that we need cities which are accessible, livable, that attract talent, encourage innovation, and create jobs and growth. I think one of the fundamental difference between the India city plan architecture and the Australian city plan architecture is that a very strong emphasis in Australian smart city project on investment and growth and creation of jobs. Now, as we continue to grow in terms of the economic parameters, the requirement of the knowledge economy is also going to undergo fundamental changes. And so when the requirement of the knowledge economy changes, the growth takes place, and so happens with the city requirement. And I think in order to respond to the new paradigm of the growth parameters, we need a new thinking that how cities are to be planned, built, and managed. And one of the significant pressure points in the new smart city or smart cities as they grow is going to be the housing, and therefore it is very important that we develop the concept for the affordable housing. But in Australian context, there are three strong pillars for the smart cities. That is the smart investment, which is linked with the economic growth, job creation, and skilling. The second strong pillar is the smart city, smart policy, because unless you have a policy paradigm, until you have a policy framework which supports the investment, it really cannot work, and therefore the second very strong pillar is smart policy. And the third is the smart technology, that how do we bring technology closer to the masses in achieving the objectives of the smart city. The way the whole process happened was that when a blueprint of the smart city was published by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, the entire plan was put for discussions, and the government invited submissions from the different kind of stakeholders, that what is it that you are looking in the smart city, what is it that you want to see as an end outcome of the smart city, and how we would like the smart city plan to be implemented. And if I'm not mistaken, yeah, about 130 submissions were received, and all the submissions all the proposals were contained in what was known as the submission plan. After that submission plan, the government has come out with the different kind of the mechanism. And I think one of the important things as part of the submissions has been the establishment of what is known as the reference group to strengthen engagement of the city policy. It also publishing the generic data on the city deals, and I'll talk about that what the city deals is all about in the Australian context. But most importantly, as part of this consultation, the government has decided to develop what is known as the National Cities Performance Framework, which we will talk about. There are 6 priorities in terms of the smart city: jobs and skills, infrastructure and investment, livability and sustainability, innovation and digital opportunities, governance, planning and regulation, and housing. And each of these 6 priorities again has been truncated into 3 different parameters, that out of those priorities, what is it you want to achieve. For example, in jobs and skills, the focus is on higher economic growth, higher employment, a more skilled workforce. In terms of infrastructure investment, the focus is on better infrastructure, better use of existing infrastructure, more effective investment. In terms of livability and sustainability, the focus is on better environmental outcomes, improved quality of life, and better amenities. In terms of innovation, the entire thrust is on higher productivity, greater transparency and better data use, greater innovation and entrepreneurship. In terms of governance, the focus is on better city planning, improved investment environment, and effective government. And in terms of housing, the improved housing affordability, increased supply and diversity of housing, and most importantly, housing in the right locations. Because even if you have the affordable housing, you have the increased supply of housing, but the locations of the housing is not appropriate, the whole concept of housing doesn't work very well in terms of the smart city. Now, how do we plan to implement the smart city? It is by an instrument which is known as the city deal. The city deal is basically some kind of a tripartite contract or memorandum between the federal government, the state government, and the city council. One of the thrust of the city deals has been the commonality in terms of the objective, in terms of the creation of the job and sustainability. So that the city deals will provide some kind of a uniform parameter in order to attain the objectives of the smart city. City deals between the Australian government, state, and as I said, between tertiary government and the local government will develop collective plans to growth, making the most of investment in city. City deals will provide a setup of specific investments and reforms needed to unlock business and industry development and ensure community. And I would like to draw your attention here that when we are talking of investment, we are also talking of investment in conjunction with the reforms, because if you are not able to create that kind of a contextual opportunity in order to bring the investment, it really doesn't work. The partnerships is the another cornerstone between the city deals, and this is the partnership not only with the government, but the citizens, and the citizens forum provide a very strong pillar for implementing city deals. But the smart city plan is not only for the big cities like Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. All the regional cities are also part and parcel of the Australian city plans, and every city or the urban area can sign and enter into deal with the state government and federal government to implement the smart city plan. So far, the 3 city deals has been signed. One is for the Townsville in the Queensland, Launceston in Tasmania, and then the Western Sydney. The Western Sydney has been taken as a group of 14 city councils. So basically, Townsville, Launceston, and the 14 city councils and the Western Sydney. So 16 city deals has been signed as on date. I think this is very important. I just wanted to pay a little focus that yes, you have a very strong smart city plan. We have done very good city deal, but how do we monitor? How do we make sure that the city plan deals are moving in the right direction? It is in that context that the government has decided to develop what is known as the National City Performance Framework, and I think probably Australia is the only country in the world where a city performance framework has been developed to order the infrastructure growth or the other components of the smart cities. In order to measure this, I think the entire focus is on the use of the big data and the digital data in order to make sure that whatever performance parameters we want to develop to measure the progress of the smart city, everything is available with the click of the mouse at a single platform. Now, how do we measure? I think the 2 sets of parameters has been developed to measure the performance indicators to order the performance framework. The 12 are contextual indicators and 41 are performance indicators. You see, when you are talking with the city, every city has a different context. And I think we need to see what is this context, and those contextual parameters has to be common. So therefore, there are 12 contextual indicators which has been developed to measure the performance of the smart city. But there are other indicators which are specific to a city. For example, the road safety, the congestion, and the traffic volumes on the road. And therefore, the entire performance framework will be a mix of indicators, and the mix of what is known as the contextual indicators as well as the performance indicators. Lastly, I just wanted to touch base about the East City Council, which I'm not saying that it is a smart city, but they have been able to develop a different kind of approach in converting the East City Council into the smart city. Now, this approach is different from many of the cities because the entire approach is city-centric. And basically, there are three areas on which they are concentrating: the better technology, better living, and better together. When they are talking of better technology, they are talking of unmanned aerial vehicles, where you were able to take stocks of what is really happening in terms of the landscape, what's really happening in terms of the traffic congestions, so that they are able to develop the digital map and map out the entire landscape. They are talking of smart parks, buildings, and facilities, so that it adds to the sustainability and livability of the city. The connected city lighting in order to conserve and conserve the electricity, and the 5D data modeling in order to facilitate the entire exercises of the use of the big data. The better living being achieved through the connected and electric transport. Healthy living lab. Healthy living lab is a very important thing. So what they are trying to do is that they are trying to analyze the different kind of health data and the population data in a lab in order to make sure that all the health requirements of the population of the city council of Ipswich are met. And then we have the entire focus on the sustainable living. In terms of the better together, application studio is basically a tool to develop the different models to implement the different pillars of the smart city. For example, from the QTs, I said about the precinct in a box, and that's what the Ipswich is trying to do. That can be developed some kind of a application studio where we can develop the different permutations and combinations for implementing the different parameters of the smart city. Digital skilling, that yes, we can talk about the big data, we can talk about the digital data, but unless you are able to skill the population in understanding the digital data, it really doesn't work. And then ultimately we have the digital services standard, that by using the digital data and the big data, how the population is to be served. So I thought these are some of the things which we'll talk about in the context of Australian context. Before I finish, I would also like to draw your attention to an event which is happening in India from 29th of August to 1st of September, which is called the Australian Business Week in India, where we will have about 150 companies from Australia in the different sectors coming to Delhi, Bhopal, Mumbai, and Bangalore, and talking with the Indian counterparts. The whole mission is being led by the Minister for Trade. There is also a separate mission on infrastructure, where I think close to 50 companies from Australia will be participating in Australian Business Week in India. So please do watch close to your town, the Australian Business Week in India from 29th of August to 1st of September. Thank you.